The iron gates of the Whitmore estate swung open, dwarfing my battered Subaru. This wasn't just dinner, it was a test. I never told my fiancé about my monthly $37,000 salary. He always saw me living simply. He invited me to dinner with his parents. I wanted to see how they treat a poor person by pretending to be a ruined and naive girl. But as soon as they appeared, the mood shifted. The gravel crunched beneath my tires like grinding teeth, warning me I was entering enemy territory alone. I parked beside a row of gleaming luxury sedans that made my car look like a scrap heap. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the performance I was about to deliver. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. No designer earrings or professional blowout. Just a messy ponytail and a navy dress from a discount rack. I looked exactly like the struggling assistant Marcus thought I was. I stepped onto the pavement, facing a house that loomed over me like a stone judge. Marcus waited at the massive oak doors, but he wasn't smiling. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between me and the window where a silhouette watched. Before he could speak, the door opened. Patricia Whitmore stood there, like a queen guarding her castle. She was small, but her presence was heavy, draped in cream silk and diamonds that caught the porch light. Her eyes didn't meet mine, they went straight to my scuffed ballet flats. Her lip curled slightly, revealing a look of pure, unfiltered disgust. "You must be the girl," she said, her voice dry as old parchment. She didn't extend a hand. Instead, she leaned past me to look at my car in the driveway, as if it were an oil stain ruining her painting. "Marcus, I thought you said she was driving herself. Why is the caterer's vehicle parked in the main circle?" The words hit with physical force. She knew exactly who I was. This wasn't a mistake. It was a power play designed to put me in my place. I waited for Marcus to correct her, to laugh it off, or to defend the woman he claimed to love. He didn't. He shifted his weight, his face flushing a deep, shameful red. "Mom, that's Cheyenne's car," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. He wasn't embarrassed by her rudeness. He was embarrassed by my poverty. That realization stung more than Patricia's insult. He reached out to take my arm, his grip tight and sweaty, pulling me inside quickly to hide me from the neighbors' prying eyes. The foyer was cold, smelling of expensive lilies and old money. Patricia turned her back on us, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor as she walked away. "Dinner is in 10 minutes. She threw over her shoulder. "Try to wash up." I stood under the crystal chandelier, feeling small in my bargain dress. But as I watched her retreat, my spine stiffened. I had come here to see if this family was worth joining. I had my answer. Now, the real game began. The dining room was a cavern of dark mahogany and velvet, illuminated by a chandelier that cost more than my first car. I sat across from Patricia, who wielded her soup spoon like a weapon of war. To my left sat Vivian, Marcus's sister, dripping in diamonds that looked too heavy for her thin neck. She stared at me with the same predator's gaze as her mother. "So, Cheyenne," Vivian started, not bothering to smile. "Marcus tells us you work in support. Does that mean you answer phones?" I kept my voice soft, playing the role I had written for myself. "I help the technical teams stay organized." I lied smoothly. "Technically, as a lead software architect, I organized entire infrastructures for Fortune 500 companies, but they didn't need to know that." Vivian exchanged a look with her mother, a smirk passing between them like a secret note. "How quaint," Patricia said, dabbing her mouth. "It is good to have modest ambitions. Not everyone is cut out for the high pressures of real success." Marcus stared into his wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew exactly what was coming next. "Speaking of success," Vivian said, leaning forward so her necklace caught the candlelight, "I ran into Alexandra yesterday. She looks incredible. She just closed a massive deal for her father's import company." The name hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Alexandra. The ex-girlfriend. The one who fit into this world of polished silver and hollow compliments. I gripped my napkin under the table, waiting for the inevitable comparison. She asked about you, Marcus, Patricia added, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She was surprised to hear you had moved on so quickly. And with someone so different. She glanced at my bargain dress, as if it were contaminated with a contagious disease. Marcus finally looked up, his face pale and sweaty. Mom, please. He murmured, but there was no fire in his defense. He was terrified of them. He was letting them cut me open, just to keep the peace at the dinner table. At the far end of the table sat a man introduced only as Richard. He had been silent until now, eating his soup with methodical precision. He was older, with sharp eyes that seemed to dissect everything they touched. He looked at me, then back to Patricia. Support roles are vital, he said, his voice gravelly. My first business partner started in a mailroom. She ended up buying me out. Patricia stiffened, clearly annoyed by the interruption from her guest. But she didn't argue. Patricia ignored him and turned her laser focus back to me. We just want to make sure you understand the reality, dear. Marcus comes from a certain world. It can be very intimidating for outsiders who might be looking for a way in. She paused to let the implication sink in. She wasn't calling me a gold digger. She was accusing me of being a parasite. Alexandra understood the burden of wealth. She didn't need anyone to carry her. We worry you might struggle. I forced a smile, tasting bile. I don't need anyone to carry me, I said quietly. I am very good at managing my own weight. As the servants cleared the plates, I caught Richard staring at me again. He wasn't looking at my cheap clothes anymore. He was looking at my face with a sudden spark of recognition. He tilted his head slightly, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He knew who I was. And for some reason, he wasn't saying a word. Dinner ended with a suffocating silence that made the air feel thin. I stood up, feigning a need to use the powder room. My legs feeling unsteady on the plush carpet. Marcus offered to guide me, but Patricia waved him down with a dismissive hand, telling me to find my own way down the hall. I walked past portraits of stern ancestors who seemed to glare at my cheap dress. The house was too quiet, masking the rot beneath the floorboards. The heavy oak door to the study was cracked open, spilling a thin slice of yellow light across the dark hallway. I intended to keep walking, to find the bathroom and splash cold water on my burning face to regain my composure. Then I heard my name. It was spoken with such venom that I froze against the wall. She's an embarrassment, Mother. Vivian hissed. Did you see her shoes? Marcus has lost his mind bringing a stray dog into this house. Patricia's voice was lower, calmer, and infinitely more terrifying than her daughter's screech. It doesn't matter what she wears, Vivian. It matters how long she stays. I pressed closer to the gap, my heart hammering against my ribs. We need time. The auditors are circling, and if the bank finds out about the liquidity crisis before the quarter ends, we lose everything. The word everything hung in the air. The Whitmore dynasty wasn't just rude, it was secretly broke. The Castellano merger is the only lifeboat we have left. Patricia continued, the ice in her tone cracking slightly under the pressure. Alexandra's father won't sign the deal unless he sees Marcus is stable. But he also wants Marcus back with Alexandra eventually. My breath hitched in my throat. The import company mentioned at dinner wasn't just idle gossip. It was their financial salvation. They were selling their son to the highest bidder. And I was the obstacle in the way. Vivian laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass that echoed down the hall. Does Marcus know he's supposed to get back with her? He seems oddly attached to the pauper. Patricia scoffed. Marcus does what he is told. He knows this little engagement is just a placeholder. He needs to look settled to calm the investors, but he's keeping Alexandra on the side. He's meeting her next week. The floor seemed to tilt. Marcus wasn't just weak. He was complicit. We let the engagement run its course for a month. Patricia plotted, her voice returning to its smooth, lethal cadence. Then we create a scandal. Theft, perhaps. It would be believable given her financial state. We dump her, Marcus plays the heartbroken victim. And Alexandra steps in, to comfort him just in time for the merger signing. They weren't just going to break my heart. They were planning to destroy my reputation, to save their crumbling empire from the ruin they deserved. I backed away slowly, my rubber soles silent on the marble floor. I didn't feel the nausea anymore. The hurt that had been stinging my eyes evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They thought I was a knave girl they could discard like trash. They had no idea they were plotting against a woman who could buy and sell their entire debt portfolio before breakfast. I checked my makeup in a hallway mirror. The victim was gone. The architect had arrived. I walked back into the living room with the poise of an executioner entering the gallows. The atmosphere had shifted during my absence, becoming thick with staged anticipation. Harold, Marcus's father, was now standing by the fireplace, nursing a brandy with a trembling hand. Patricia and Vivian sat on the velvet sofa, their expressions rearranged into masks of polite interest. They looked like well-fed cats watching a mouse limp into a corner. Marcus stood in the center of the rug, looking pale. Marcus stepped forward, his hands fidgeting nervously with the hem of his tailored jacket. "Cheyenne," he started, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat to try again. "I know tonight has been intense. My family can be a lot to handle for someone like you." He glanced at his mother, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. A silent command to stick to the script. He took my hands in his. His palms were damp with cold sweat. He dropped to one knee. A movement that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and snapped it open. Inside sat a diamond that looked impressive from a distance, but was cloudy up close. It was a chaotic stone filled with inclusions, likely chosen by Patricia for its size rather than its quality. "Cheyenne, I love you," he lied, looking past my ear. "Will you marry me and make me the happiest man alive?" The silence stretched, tight as a bowstring, as the question hung in the recycled air. Behind him, Patricia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. She wasn't watching a romantic milestone, she was watching a business transaction close. Vivian covered a smirk with her hand, likely calculating how quickly they could dispose of me once the merger was secure. They expected tears of gratitude from the poor girl. They expected me to fall to my knees and thank them. I looked down at Marcus, really looked at him. Dissecting the man I thought I knew. I saw the weakness in his jaw and the deception behind his blue eyes. A part of me wanted to spit in his face and walk out to my car, leaving them to their bankruptcy. But that was too easy. They needed to learn that people like me weren't disposable pawns. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to burn their house down. "Yes, Marcus," I whispered, injecting a tremor of fake emotion into my voice. "Of course I will." He let out a breath that sounded more like relief than joy. He slid the ring onto my finger. It was loose, sliding around like a shackle that didn't quite fit. Patricia clapped her hands once, a sharp sound like a gunshot. "Wonderful," she declared, standing up. "Simply wonderful. We must have a toast to celebrate this unexpected union." Harold poured champagne into crystal flutes, his hands still shaking as he passed them around the circle. As we raised our glasses, my eyes locked with Richard's across the room. He hadn't moved from his armchair, but he raised his own glass slightly in my direction. Then, he winked. It wasn't a flirtatious gesture, it was a salute. He knew exactly what game was being played. And for the first time all night, I knew I wasn't playing it alone. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in deception. To Marcus, I was the blushing bride. To be obsessing over floral arrangements and seating charts. I let Patricia bully me into a muted color palette that she claimed would hide my lack of breeding. But at night, the real work began. I sat in my home office, surrounded by server racks and 3 monitors, peeling back the layers of the Whitmore empire. It wasn't just a business. It was a rotting corpse painted gold. My algorithms chewed through public records and leaked financial statements with terrifying speed. The dealership's books were a disaster zone of leveraged assets and high-interest loans. They were bleeding cash, surviving only on the reputation Harold's father had built decades ago. I found a string of frantic emails between Harold and his bank, pleading for extensions on loans that were already underwater. They weren't just broke, they were drowning. The Castellano merger wasn't an expansion strategy. It was a desperate life raft. But the real smoking gun wasn't the debt, it was the theft. I traced a series of irregular withdrawals from the accounts to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The digital trail was sloppy, amateurish work that no one had bothered to audit in years. The shell company paid for luxury vacations, jewelry, and a condo in Seattle. The signatory on the account wasn't Harold or Patricia. It was Vivian. She was stealing the silver while the ship sank. Digital proof wasn't enough to satisfy the rage burning in my gut. I needed to see the betrayal with my own eyes. On a Tuesday night, Marcus told me he had a late strategy meeting with his father. I tracked his phone to a dimly lit bistro in the city center. I parked across the street, watching through the lens of my telephoto camera. He wasn't with his father. He was with a woman who looked like a walking trust fund. Alexandra. They sat at a corner table, their bodies leaning toward each other like magnets. There was no hesitation in Marcus's touch. He laughed at something she said, his hand covering hers on the white tablecloth. It was an intimacy he had never shown me, effortless and practiced. He looked relieved to be with her, free from the burden of pretending to love a pauper. I snapped the shutter, capturing the lie in high definition. The flash of betrayal didn't hurt anymore. 2 days before the party, I met Richard in a private booth at a coffee shop far from the Whitmore estate. He didn't look like the silent dinner guest anymore. He looked like a general readying his troops. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "This is the internal audit they buried 5 years ago," he said, his voice low. "It proves Harold knew about the liquidity issues and lied to the shareholders." This was the final kill shot. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of their destruction in my hands. "Why help me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Richard's eyes hardened, reflecting decades of patience. "They cheated me out of a partnership 20 years ago. I've just been waiting for someone with the teeth to bite back." I smiled, tucking the evidence into my bag. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the cage door was about to slam shut. Let them party. The Whitmore estate had been transformed into a desperate fantasy of limitless wealth. White silk tents billowed on the lawn, anchored by massive urns of imported white, roses that smelled sickeningly sweet. A string quartet played near the fountain, their music struggling to cover the nervous energy radiating from the hosts. Patricia moved through the crowd like a shark in chiffon, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. She was selling a lie to every creditor in the room. The air felt heavy, charged with the static electricity of impending doom. I pulled my battered Subaru up to the valet stand, right behind a Bentley that cost more than a house. The young attendant hesitated, looking at my rusted bumper with open confusion, likely wondering if I was delivering late hors d'oeuvres. I killed the engine, savoring the vibration one last time before I let it go. This car had been my Trojan horse, my shield against their greed. Now it was just a prop I no longer needed. I handed the keys to the boy, who took them with 2 fingers. I opened the door and stepped onto the limestone drive, letting the transformation take hold. The dress was a custom emerald silk that moved like liquid smoke, cut to devastating precision by a designer who didn't sell to the public. It hugged my frame and trailed slightly, demanding space. My heels were diamond-encrusted stilettos that clicked a sharp, dangerous rhythm on the pavement. I wasn't the mouse anymore. I adjusted the vintage ruby pendant at my throat, feeling its cold weight against my skin. It was time to hunt. The walk from the driveway to the main tent felt like crossing a threshold between two different dimensions. The gravel crunched beneath my soles. A familiar sound now marking a new reality. Security guards who had previously looked through me now straightened their posture, sensing authority they couldn't quite name. I held my head high, shedding the slump of the poor secretary with every step. The night air was cool, but my skin burned with anticipation. I reached the entrance of the tent and paused, letting the light catch the rubies. A hush rippled outward from the entrance, silencing conversations row by row like a falling domino chain. Guests turned, expecting a celebrity, and found me instead. The confusion was palpable. A physical wave of disorientation, crashing against the shore of their expectations. I saw a woman whisper behind her hand. Her eyes wide as she took in the craftsmanship of my gown. They didn't know who I was, but they knew money when they saw it. This wasn't costume jewelry. This was old, heavy, undeniable power staring them down. I moved toward the bar, the crowd parting instinctively to let me pass. Near the champagne tower, I spotted Julian Thorne, the CEO of a major cloud computing firm. He squinted at me, swirling his drink. Before his eyes went wide with shock. "Graham," he mouthed, stepping forward as if seeing a ghost. He knew me as the architect who had saved his server infrastructure last year. I gave him a subtle, sharp nod. A silent command to watch and wait. The whispers began to mutate from confusion to speculation. Marcus emerged from the shadows of the VIP section, looking for the dowdy girl he planned to discard. When his eyes landed on me, he stopped dead, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He didn't recognize the dress designer or the jewels, but he recognized the change in my posture. The submissive, grateful fiancé was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked at him not with adoration, but with the cold, clinical detachment of an auditor reviewing a failed ledger. He looked terrified. Patricia intercepted me, before Marcus could find his voice, her smile strained to the breaking point. She gripped my arm with fingers that felt like talons, pulling me away from a group of investors. "What is this?" she hissed, her eyes darting to the ruby pendant. "Where did you get a rental like this? You look ridiculous trying to play dress up." Her voice trembled, betraying her fear. She knew, deep down, that rentals didn't fit like this. She knew she was looking at something she couldn't afford. I pulled my arm from her grasp with a slow, deliberate movement that made her step back. "It's not a rental, Patricia," I said, dropping the soft, breathy octave of the knave girl. My real voice was lower, sharper. The voice I used to command boardrooms and negotiate million-dollar contracts. "And I am done playing dress up." The color drained from her face as the sonic shift hit her. She realized in that second that she had never actually met me. She had only met the reflection of her own arrogance. Before Patricia could sputter a retort, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. It was Mr. Henderson, the regional representative for the auto manufacturer holding the Whitmore license. He ignored Patricia completely, turning his back on the hostess to bow his head slightly to me. "Miss Graham," he said, his tone deferential and serious. "I didn't know you were consulting on this." Patricia gasped, a wet, choking sound. The man who held her financial fate in his hands just bowed to her secretary. The game was over. Patricia recovered from her shock with the desperate instinct of a cornered animal. She grabbed my elbow, her nails digging into my skin through the silk. You want attention, she hissed, her eyes wild with panic. Then get on that stage and thank these people for tolerating you. She practically shoved me toward the podium, thinking she was sending a lamb to the slaughter. She believed I would stammer, cry, or humiliate myself further. She didn't realize she was handing the microphone to the prosecutor. I climbed the stairs, my heels clicking like gunfire. I stood before the microphone, the feedback whine cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The spotlight blinded me for a second before I adjusted, seeing the sea of expectant faces. To my left, Marcus looked nauseous. To my right, Patricia stood with her arms crossed, waiting for my collapse. I smoothed the emerald silk of my gown, a garment worth more than the catering budget for this entire farce. I didn't tremble. I leaned in. Thank you all for coming, I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. When I met this family, I continued, locking eyes with Patricia, I decided to conduct an experiment. The crowd went deadly silent, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. I wanted to know if the Whitmores valued character or currency. So, I wore a $12 dress and drove a rusted car. I let them believe I was poor. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the guests. Patricia's smug expression faltered, replaced by the dawning horror that the script had been burned. I learned that in this house, poverty is treated like a sin. I turned my gaze to Marcus, who was sweating through his expensive suit. But cruelty I expected, I said, pitching my voice lower. Deceit, however, was a surprise. I recounted the conversation in the hallway, word for word. I repeated Vivian's insults and Tricia's strategic planning. I heard you call me a placeholder, I told the room, watching the color drain from Marcus's face. A temporary distraction to keep Marcus occupied, until he could merge with the Castellano fortune. The gasps were audible now. Sharp intakes of breath from the socialites. And Marcus, I said, pointing to the screen behind me that was meant for a slideshow of our romance. He played his part perfectly. I tapped the command I had cued on my phone. The photo of him holding hands with Alexandra at the bistro filled the massive screen. It was high-definition proof of his infidelity, dated 2 days ago. While I was planning a wedding, he was planning a merger. Alexandra, standing near the back, covered her mouth in shock. Marcus looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. But why the desperation? I asked the room, stepping out from behind the podium. Why force a marriage for a business deal? I scanned the faces of the investors, lingering on the bank representatives. Because Whitmore Automotive isn't just struggling. It is insolvent. Harold let out a strangled cry, lunging forward before security held him back. They are drowning in debt, I announced. The bank accounts are empty. The loans are defaulted. This merger was the only thing keeping the lights on. The truth hit the crowd like a physical blow. I wasn't finished. I pulled a sleek black drive from my clutch. I am a lead software architect by trade, I revealed, watching the realization dawn on Vivian's face. And I found where the remaining money went. I pointed a manicured finger at her. Vivian has been siphoning company funds to an offshore account in the Caymans for 3 years. Vivian screamed that I was a liar, her voice shrill and panicked. But the accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She looked at her husband, but he was backing away. Richard stepped forward from the shadows near the stage, holding a thick manila folder. He didn't look at me, he walked straight to the chief of police, who was attending as a guest. He handed over the file with a grim nod. The evidence is all here, I said, my voice ringing with finality. Bank transfers, dates and signatures, it's over. Vivian's knees buckled, and she grabbed the table for support, knocking over a tower of champagne glasses. The crash of breaking crystal was the only sound in the tent. I turned back to Marcus, who stood alone in the wreckage of his life. I twisted the engagement ring off my finger. It felt gritty and cheap against my skin. "I believe this belongs to you," I said, tossing it at his chest. He fumbled to catch it, looking at the cloudy stone as if it were a cursed object. "Give it to Alexandra," I advised him, my voice devoid of any warmth. "She's the only one who can afford to bail you out now." I walked down the stairs, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. Vivian lunged at me, her face twisted in a mask of pure hate, her hand raised to strike. But her husband caught her wrist in mid-air, his grip iron hard. He stared at her with disgust, then shoved her back toward her mother. I didn't flinch. I didn't stop. I walked out of the tent and into the cool night air, leaving the chaos and the ruin behind me where it belonged. 1 week later, the morning sun hit my kitchen table, illuminating the only thing that mattered: silence. I swiped through the news on my tablet, sipping coffee that tasted richer than usual. The headlines were screaming in bold black text, a stark contrast to the quiet peace of my apartment. "Whitmore empire crumbles amid fraud scandal." Read the banner on the local business journal. It felt surreal to see the destruction reduced to pixels and ink. The chaos I had orchestrated was now public property, consumed by strangers over their morning coffee. The article was brutal in its precision, sparing no detail of the family's collapse. It confirmed that the auto manufacturer had terminated the franchise agreement immediately following the party. Without the cars, the dealerships were just empty lots of asphalt and debt. But the real story was the arrest. Vivian had been taken into custody for embezzlement, her mugshot looking far less polished than her engagement party photos. Richard had kept his word. My name was nowhere to be found. To the world, they had simply imploded under their own greed. I touched the ruby pendant at my throat, feeling the cool stone warm against my skin. My grandmother used to tell me that wealth was a tool, not a costume. She taught me that character is what remains when the money burns down. And the Whitmores were standing in the ashes of their own making. They had believed their net worth made them untouchable. But they had forgotten the most basic currency of all: integrity. I realized I wasn't just rich in assets anymore. I was finally rich in the truth. My phone buzzed against the marble counter, shattering the moment of reflection. I glanced at the screen and saw his name flashing like a warning light. Marcus. It was a long block of text, frantic and pathetic. "Cheyenne, please let me explain." It started. "I didn't know about the theft. I was just trying to save my family. I still love you." The words were desperate claws trying to scratch their way back into my life. He was still trying to spin a narrative, even now, when the script was burned. I stared at the message, waiting for a surge of anger or a pang of regret. Neither came. Instead, I felt a profound, hollow indifference. He wasn't a villain to be fought or a lover to be mourned. He was just a stranger who had lost his way. I didn't reply. I didn't ask for closure. I simply pressed delete and watched his name vanish from my screen forever. The digital trash bin swallowed the last remnant of Marcus Whitmore. The silence returned, cleaner and heavier than before. I stood up and rinsed my mug, ready to start the real work of living. It was time to go to the job that I loved, with the people who respected the code I wrote, not the clothes I wore. I grabbed my bag and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't hiding anything anymore. I walked out the door, ready to build something new. I checked my stock portfolio and smiled. It was going to be a very profitable day.